Hi everybody, I'm Claire. I'm here with Janet, as Andrew said today, to talk about why executive sponsorship is so important to any transformation project. You may well know Janet. She's very, very active or proactive in many of the Dynamics communities, and we're both customer success managers within the BizApps customer success team. Much of the work we do involves working with executive sponsors. So we're here to talk to you about executive sponsorship, why it's so important, and along the way we'll share some of our experience of great and disastrous exec sponsors that we've come across and share some of the tactics that we've employed to get good executive engagement on the CRM and ERP projects we've worked on. So as I said, we're lucky to have Janet with us today. She's highly experienced in change management, and she'll have a number of great stories and useful tips on how you can turn your project sponsors into great sponsors. As Andrew said, we're looking forward to hearing from you, so please don't be shy. Put your comments and questions in the chat and we'll answer these as we go along, and invite you to come off mute for the Q&A at the end. Okay, so let's get started. Just to do a level set, what is an executive sponsor? Executive sponsor on the project, or an SRO in public sector, senior responsible officer, is a senior member of the project team, usually the leader of the project team, the chair, and will be a leader in the company, someone with influence to get the project over the line. And that person will often hold the purse strings and will be the exec who is held responsible for the glory or tragedy that results from the project. So let's look at an exec sponsor you may know. This chap, Satya Nadella, he's the Microsoft CEO. And the reason we've got him on screen is that he's an example of an excellent sponsor. He's been in his position as CEO since 2014 now, having been at Microsoft for about 20 years. And so he knows the company inside out. And when he took the helm, Microsoft was a very different company to the company it is now. Can anyone give me a quick shout out as to who was the CEO prior to Satya, but after Bill Gates? Because there's only been 3 CEOs to date of Microsoft. Anybody remember who was the second CEO?
Steve
Ballmer. Steve Ballmer, well done. Yes, absolutely. I've only been at Microsoft for a couple of years now, but I understand that Steve was a very different personality to Satya. And where Steve was all about the product, Satya is all about the people, his people, and our customers. And one of the ways that he's an excellent sponsor is that he's extremely visible. He really is a poster child for upfront and visible sponsorship. He communicates all the time, very effectively. And the great thing is that you feel he's really approachable. I can email him. He sends emails to me. Now, they may be written by someone else, but I still get them. And he shows up and answers questions at regular town halls. There's a Yammer channel we have called CEO Connection, where we can ask him questions and we get answers. Now, every big change, every project, every big new initiative comes from him. And that's reinforced by senior leaders. And then that's further reinforced by our area leaders, and then through to the directors and the managers. So when I receive a message from Satya, I will hear that again 4 or 5 times at least via different communication channels from different people. And one of the great things about Satya is he really walks the walk. I can't think of a time that he's asked us to do or asked me to do something that he's not already doing himself. I went to Ready. Some of you may have heard of that. It's the Microsoft big annual staff conference when I joined a couple of years ago. And it was really incredible when he got up on stage and he was demonstrating some of the tools, like Cortana, that he's asking us to use. So he's not paying lip service to any of these tools, and he's using them every day. And that had real impact for us. Okay, so Satya's an example of a great sponsor. And I'm sure you'll all have examples of your own and can think now of people that you've met or you may be working with, I hope not, who aren't very good sponsors. And before I start talking about what you can do, or we start talking about what you can do to encourage your leaders to be great sponsors, I think it'll help your sponsors to know how and why being a good sponsor, executive sponsor, is so important. And we've all got anecdotal stories about why we need good sponsors, but it's great to have those to share. But it's also good to have evidence to support the experience. Microsoft work with a leading change management research organization called ProSci. They've been around for more than 20 years now, and every couple of years they do a detailed study of hundreds to thousands of big transformation projects, mainly software, around the world. And you can see, I think, from the research they've done, that the evidence is pretty clear. As we can see here, the biggest determiner of success of a project is having a good, active and visible executive sponsor on your project. And that's not just for 2018. As I said, they do studies every couple of years. That's the result of every single study over the last 20 years or so. It's had the same result, that active and visible sponsorship will determine, or will be the biggest number one factor in whether your project succeeds, gets over the line, and gets over the line well or not. So how important is it that we have good executive sponsorship? It's pretty darn important, actually. Projects are failing at the rate of knots. Well over 50% of CRM projects are seen to be failures. And that might not necessarily be, that the company's gone bankrupt and everything's completely stopped. It could be that they're seen to not have achieved what they were planning and wanting to achieve, that they've spent all those hundreds of thousands or millions of pounds on. And so there's lots of sources of this evidence if you look at the base of the slide. But it shows that not only are many projects failing, but over 2/3 of those failures are non-technology related. If you look at the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that really only about 1/3 of failures are due to the technology, and the rest of the failure has been due to process, people management, and actual strategy, the people side of this project. And that's where Janice and I, as customer success managers, focus. That's why we have a job, because we work with projects, with executive sponsors, with their project teams to get the people side of change and executive sponsors on our projects to help get them to be successful. So how much impact does a sponsor have? And again, research here from ProSci, with all the people interviewed, it shows, or the evidence shows, or the results show, that with a great executive sponsor, with an effective sponsor, the people interviewed said that they met or exceeded their project objectives 72% of the time. Whereas with an ineffective sponsor, a sponsor that doesn't show up, doesn't do what they're supposed to do, project objectives were only met 29% of the time. Now, this is really important, because with a good sponsor, you've got perhaps an 80% chance of success. So there's still that area and that gap, that 20%, where you might not necessarily make it, or might not achieve all your objectives. But how horrible to go into a project realizing that actually you've only got a 29 or 30% chance of success. So why are executive sponsors so important? It's about change. And it's about authority and credibility. With any big transformation project, really doesn't matter what it is, you're going from one state to another, aren't you? Your current state is where you are, where you may be comfortable, where you've been doing things for the last 10 years or so in exactly the same way, using the same bit of software that might have a few quirks, but you know how it works, and thank you, you'll stay where you are. Getting to that future state, that nirvana that apparently is going to be wonderful, and it's your leaders' responsibility to get you from that current state through perhaps a painful transition state to that future state. So when I said authority and credibility, we as employees naturally look to our leaders for messages. They're the leader of the pack, aren't they? So what they do, both verbally and through their actions, shows employees how important the project is and what the commitment is from the organisation to that project. So when I say by actions, it's not necessarily just what they say, but I mean, for example, if your sponsor isn't turning up to steering board meetings, how important really is that project to them? And I think we've got to accept that the majority of us don't really like change very much. I mean, goodness, if I try and change my family's curry night to a different evening, there's complete uproar and gnashing of teeth. And that's just my husband, by the way. Okay, so hopefully you've got some evidence there in your kit bag. And given that executive sponsorship is just so important, what specifically do the execs need to do? And well, it's as easy as ABC, and I'm going to hand over now to Janet to take you through the ABCs of executive sponsorship.
Okay, thanks, Claire. So everybody in this call will either have experience of a Dynamics project, an IT project, that they can relate some of the things I'm going to say to them. So whilst I'm speaking, if you can keep in mind or keep thinking about either a really good sponsor and how they worked, or not such a great sponsor and how they worked. And ProSci, I believe, as Claire said, is as easy as ABC. So we've A for active and visible participant throughout the project. B is build a coalition of sponsorship with peers and managers. And C is to communicate directly with employees. That is really easy peasy lemon squeezy. So many people don't do this. So we're going to go and deep dive very quickly into the ABC. So Claire, if you give me the next slide. So what does active and visible? Now, we've just been talking about this chap, and Claire has been raving, and I back Claire and everything she says, a really great active and visible sponsor. So think about a project you've been on, or maybe a current project, and think about your key executive sponsor. So what is their role? To be active and visible. So what does active and visible mean on this project? It means two things. It means active and visible, firstly, on the people element of the change. So that is walking the walk, talking the talk. Claire gave a great example of how Satya was using our tools. I've worked on projects where we're trying to implement a Microsoft project tool. So it was Yammer in this particular case, and the exec sponsor just wasn't even going to use it. I was like, oh, how are you going to encourage people to participate if you're not going to use the actual product? Be there for feedback and listen. I can contact Satya. I know he's got, there's a lot of, but even knowing that that's available to me is beneficial. Using the tools, go through the CM training if required. We can't be prima donnas about this. Everybody has to go through it together. If the exec sponsor is to use the product, then they should attend the training just like everybody else. They have to lead from the front. They also have to set expectations, motivate, and encourage. So they have to be present. They have to understand what everybody is going through. Claire, the next slide for me. So this is, I snipped this off Twitter. I found Satya in a kind of board meeting. So I'm going to pretend this is my project meeting he's now sitting in. So there's an active and visible role to live as a project element of the change. So that is when he's sitting, or Satya's sitting at the top of the table, or whoever your exec sponsor is, they need to know why everybody is represented around that table. So they need to understand the roles of everybody involved in the project. They need to set expectation and establish clear objectives for the project. Now, a lot of people believe the role of an executive sponsor is to cut the cake and cut the ribbon, and that is not the purpose. They have to hold the team accountable for results. They have to attend frequent project review meetings and actively review progress. They have to ensure the people and process element of change is understood and provided for. All of a sudden, this is getting an awful lot of work. It's not just cutting the cake. It's not cutting the ribbon. It's a lot of work. Now, some of the things is when people get nominated to become an executive sponsor of a project, it's like, tag, you're it. But nobody tells them and explains the roles that they have to go through. So this is what we believe is a representation of what active and visible means. It's hard work. Claire, give me the next slide for the Bs. So we're going to build a coalition. So what does that mean? Anybody know what the movie picture is in the top left? Come on, it was a good movie.
Armageddon?
Close.
That's the other one.
Close.
Deep Impact.
Deep Impact.
Oh, yes. Look,
Yes.
you can see it.
So building a coalition. Why do we need to build a coalition? I'm going to explain that Deep Impact in a wee second. So why do we need to build a coalition is because I love this bit. I do this a lot. It's sponsors. Sponsors. It's more than one person leading the charge. Now, people will build together an organisation chart. This in my head is not an organisation chart. This is who's impacted by the change. Now, not everybody at the top of everybody's org chart, the head of the whole company is going to be the head of your project. No, it's probably going to be somebody else further down the org chart. In this particular example, I've given one as the exec sponsor. And he lives in IT. Have you ever heard of that? A sponsor that lives in IT? We call that, Claire and I and our team call it beware of the IT sponsor. It's not that they're not good. It's not that they can be effective and amazing. It's that usually they're kind of a siloed department that doesn't affect the impacted groups, as you can see in the bottom, of the entire impacted coalition of all the people impacted in that project. So if you look at the diagram on the exec sponsor, impacted group A and impacted group B are the people who'll probably recognise that exec sponsor in IT. But C, D, E and F are going to go, who's that? So we need to make sure that there is a coalition of sponsors that people will recognise and understand. So when they're walking the walk and they're talking the talk, that people will be able to listen, hence the guy with the big ear, to listen and understand what's going on. So we would need to build a coalition. I'm presently working on a project, a very, very large project in the UK. And we have spent weeks building, helping build coalitions and understanding large impacted groups and who's going to be able to influence each one of those groups. So it's all about who's been impacted and how is that sponsor going to influence those impacted groups. Claire, the next slide, please. And this is going to be our C, our communication. So remember the slide before that had the big ear? Why was that so important? Because we as individuals only listen to certain people. And we in an organization, we listen to two types of messaging. We listen to the business message, what's happening with the strategy. That's when we listen to Satya. What's happening with the direction of the company? Why are we being put through all this pain? It's really uncomfortable. It's like Claire's curry night. Don't change it. But then I want to know really personal stuff about me, about the process change. I want to know about, is my job going to be affected? Is my job at risk? It's all about me. It's what's in it for me. So there's two types of messaging. The business messages, that's my Satya. And my personal messages, that's my direct report. That's my Geary Fox. That's Claire, my direct manager. So ProSci, again, has gone and does all of this wonderful research, and we find out who wants to hear. Who do we want to listen to? So it's a business message. From this diagram, you can see we want to hear from the CEO and the president. That is your exec sponsors. It might be the coalition of sponsors that you build, but those are the people I'll pay attention to. I might not pay attention to the IT manager exec sponsor because I don't know who they are. So you need to make sure that I'm willing to listen to those messages. And sometimes if you've been given an exec sponsor that nobody's going to listen to, that they can't impact those groups, then you need to find another sponsor or build the coalition to do that, to send those messages, because we can't have it falling on deaf ears. When it's a personal message, as you can see, 67% of people want to hear it from their employee supervisor. Now, here's a wee sneaky bit of advice. You have all been worked in projects, you've all been in the game, you might be a customer, might be a partner. How many times have you been told or heard that the change team, I've been a change manager in organisations, the change team should send out the comms messages? Nobody wants to hear from the change team. Nobody. Nobody knows who I am. Nobody cares who I am. Janet Robb, what she sent me an email for? So you have to be able to clearly understand who sends out the messages. Personal messages are from your direct reports. If you saw on the last slide, you work out who they are. So it's building a coalition. So remember, it's active and visible for the project and for the people. Build a coalition so people will listen to the messages and to see, communicate directly with employees and make sure that individual, so you have to set up communication plans with who that sender is for that impacted group. So it's ABC. Claire, I'm going to hand back over to you.
Thanks, Janet. I'm back. Okay. All right. Okay, so since we know what they need to do, thank you very much, Janet. And it's the main, and since executive sponsorship is the main factor determining whether a project is successful or not, and it doesn't take millions and millions of extra pounds. So it might be a bit of a surprise to you to know that a lot of sponsors struggle with their role. And again, based on ProSci research, the number one reason that sponsors struggle with their role, looking at that research, is that of all the people interviewed in these longitudinal studies, only about 20% fully understand their role. So that and by fully understanding their role, it doesn't mean they're going to do what they're supposed to do, but at least they understand or understood what they should have done to be a great sponsor. So we're looking at 80% of people who really don't know perhaps what they're doing or don't know fully what they're doing. And I think this is where you can have a really big impact by coaching them on the ABCs. Okay, and the second reason is that they think that people will just change. So based on the position that they've got to, where they've got to in their organization, sponsors have a tendency to believe, or some sponsors do, that they can just tell people to change and they'll jump to it. Something along the lines of, like I've explained, just get on and do it. Now, anyone who has children knows that that's categorically not true. If, like me, you've seen the state of your child's bedroom and you've shouted and shouted until you're blue in the face to clean it up with absolutely no effect, you will know exactly where I'm coming from. People don't change because they're told to. I think we all know that. They may well pay lip service to it or do the absolute minimum. But what we're talking about here with the projects that we're interested in is great adoption, isn't it? And if you don't adopt it fully, you're not all in, you're not going to repeat all you're not going to reap all of the benefits. And I think we've also got to understand that sponsors tend to live in the future state. Having got to where they've got to in their career, they tend to be very goal-oriented, driven people, and they know exactly where they want to get to. They've they're also going to have a lot more information, aren't they, on this project, and they already have a good idea of what's in it for them. So they need to understand that it's their job to help guide their people to the future state that they are already in. So knowing the ABCs and knowing these three potential areas of struggle and helping your sponsors with the ABCs, you'll improve their chances of becoming a great sponsor. But even with help, there are some mistakes that sponsors commonly make. And Janet's now going to go through these with you before we wrap up and then take questions.
Okie dokie. So I'm going to start with a wee story. I'm sorry, I'm based in Belfast, so I put the word wee in front of everything. Wee cup of tea. So a wee story. I've been working within Dynamics customer relationship management F&O field for about 15 years. It's a long time. Anyway, I've got a few war wounds, and I bet you have a few war wounds. I'm going to start with a story, and I think this particular exec sponsor covers all 5 of the most common mistakes. And as we go through them, I want you to think about, yeah, I've heard that before. I've seen that before. Yeah, I've experienced that. Or try and relate some of these key mistake areas to your experience and think about the outcome and the struggle that it caused. So I'm based in Belfast, hence the Harland Wolff Cranes. And I was working on a project in the south of Ireland, which, by the way, took 8.5 hours to drive to. That was a very sore bum when I got out of that car. Anyway, so it was for a government organisation, which was a really good government organisation. So a lot of us, a lot of our companies, a lot of coalition of companies came together to provide this project. And a lot of us gave it at half price or for free or brought all our charity days in today. So it was a really great feel on the launch day, on our first project day. It was a really great feel, real great motivation. We were going to do something good here. And we had an amazing exec sponsor, and she was vivacious and she was brilliant. And I didn't see her again after that first day. So she had delegated her role to somebody else who we didn't really know who they were, and they didn't know why they were there. And anyway, we got going. We ran our workshops. We did everything we needed to do. We were doing our deliveries at the end of each day. We were working in our hotel rooms at night, really, really wanting to make a difference here. And a couple of weeks later, we were doing our final run through. We'd done lots of little run throughs throughout. And the exec sponsors came back, and I have to say, I didn't even remember who they were. And we delivered this ta-da moment, and their face wasn't great. And when we had been advised by the person they delegated to, we'd done what we were told to do, and we had everything approved and everything signed off. And what we didn't know was that the exec sponsor knew about new legislation that was coming down the line that was going to have to be built into the system. We never knew about that. The person they delegated to didn't know about. And basically, it had to be, the line had to be drawn in the sand. Nothing was worked. It wasn't what they needed. It wasn't fit for purpose. And then the change requests started to come in. And we'd already given everything so much for free. And because that exec sponsor hadn't stayed active and visible, had been staying within the project, the cost of that project had doubled. And it was really, really horrible feeling that it not only did it double, I think it nearly trebled. And then it didn't go live for X amount of months, and we missed the deadline, all because an exec sponsor did not become active and visible. So let's go through these mistakes and see if you can relate anything. If you can go back to one slide, Claire, for me, to mistake 1. So the first one is failed to remain active and visible throughout the project. Ding, that's what I've just described. Was involved at the beginning, announced the change and then walked away, did not actively participate, and acted in name and only in name. Now, I can guarantee you all have a story for me on that. Next slide, Claire. Mistake 2 is underestimated or misunderstood the people side of change. This happens a lot. Claire and I will tell you this happens a lot. We get brought in as customer success managers to the largest Dynamics deals in the UK. And we start talking about change and nobody's ever thought about it. Nobody's ever considered the people element of change. So incorrect assumptions of the degree of impact of change that on individuals and groups. The amount of times, I wish I'd had a fiver for every time I've heard it, that people say, oh, it's not that big a change, it'll be all right. Yeah, it's about individual people's change. Underestimate time and resources needed. Assume change management was only communication. Now, Claire and I will bang our head against the table at that one. People will say, oh yeah, we've got the people element of change covered. We've got training and we've got communications. Now, Claire and I know that's a lot more. It's about sponsorship, it's about coaching, it's about champions networks, it's about reinforcement, it's about resistance, it's about creating the what's in it for me journeys. It's not just communication and training. Next slide, Claire. Failed to communicate messages for the need for change. So you just heard me mention the what's in it for me. So a lot of the time this is pushed on people, and what's happening? What I don't understand. So did not articulate the change or the business benefits. So people go, hold on, why am I going through all this discomfort? Well, potentially, Janet, you're going through this discomfort because it's going to improve your process. It's going to create hopefully X amount of new jobs. And Janet, it's going to potentially create profits of X percentage, which might mean that at the end of the year, we might be able to give you that pay rise. Oh, hey, I'm on board. But if you don't tell me, it's just pain. Assumed people understand what's going on. No, you can never assume anything. And they do not communicate enough. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Next one, Claire. Mistake 4 is delegate the sponsorship role and responsibilities. Exactly what happened in my story. So to delegate the leadership sponsorship to subordinate or a project manager. I was on a project very, very recently in the UK, and I met the exec sponsor for the first time. And that was the middle of the project. And although everybody would know who they were, they hadn't even been involved in anything to do with the project. No review meetings, no, didn't understand the rules, didn't understand what people were doing, didn't understand the timelines, nothing. Was a complete figurehead. And we've had to literally hit the stop button and re-change the whole sponsorship to get people involved. Assume that next level structures would take ownership of the soft functions and deliverables. Oh, I thought you were going to do that. No, but I thought you were doing that. You have to clearly point it out, and everybody needs to know whose their role is and what is their responsibility. Outsource sponsorship to consultants instead of leading from the front. Claire and myself and the rest of my team will all come back when we talk on review meetings on our customers, and we put a major risk when we see a consultant or an external source against a key role within that project. High risk. Somebody could leave and they really don't have. It's great that you get paid, but at the end of the day, if you get another better job offer, you could be off. But if you're somebody that's fixed in the organisation, has been there 20 years, we've got security that they're not going to go anywhere. And the final reason for mistakes, Claire, is fail to demonstrate support for the project in words and actions. I talked at the start about a gentleman that I was working with that wouldn't use the product, which was Yammer. So they got caught not walking the walk. Well, if he's not doing it, why should I do it? Did not empower the team, did not motivate the team. Assumed the change was obvious, rational and logical, and therefore did not require any direct support. Recently, I'm still on this project, was on a project, still on a project, where they said, oh, sure, the change isn't that much. And within 5 minutes, I'm like, well, it's a completely different process. It's a different system altogether. So you're taking somebody's job role, changing the process altogether, and changing the user interface. And that's not a big change. So if I took you out of your day job and said, boom, you've got a different job now, that's a big change. So people will say, oh, it's only this, it's only that, and really not understand the impact of that change has on an individual. Remember the key thing, that organizations do not change. They're bricks and mortar. They don't change. It's when the individuals are part and involved in that organization when they change. So everybody has to change collectively. So just hand back to Claire, I think. Yeah, there you go.
Fab, thank you, Janet. Thanks very much. So really, just want to summarise what we've whizzed through in this short time, and really summarise what you can do to help your sponsor improve and to help them step up and be a good sponsor. I think maybe the first thing would be, the first bit of advice would be to help them and help them understand how many projects fail. And this might be a little bit about what's in it for me, for them, because if they're going to be associated with a failed project, it's quite possible it's going to be career limiting for them. It's really important to help them understand why employees resist change, why they don't want to do it. As you know, we've both said, they're already, the sponsors already are living in the future state. As Janet was saying, you know, people are going to be fearful perhaps of their jobs or how their jobs might change, and you know, their lack of knowledge and their fear that maybe they won't be able to learn what they need to learn and still do their day jobs, that they might not be able to hack it. So it's important for them to understand that, not just assume that they can tell everybody, and it's very logical, so we're just going to do it. So very much about the messaging. Do coach them on the ABCs of their role. I shouldn't say it's amazing to me how many sponsors don't understand their role, but why wouldn't they if they haven't been told or they haven't been involved in change management? You know, I had a project last year that I'm still working on now, where the executive sponsor hadn't sent any communications out for a year, and the poor project manager was sending stuff out every single week. And when I got 30 people together in a room, none of them knew what was going on with the project, not because the project manager hadn't told them, they hadn't bothered reading the emails. When we went through executive sponsorship with the exec sponsor, when I went through the ABCs with her, she is transformed. And, you know, everybody now knows what is going on. And that's great, because you're going to get tons of problems on projects. They're never going to be easy or straightforward. But if people really are not pulling in the same direction and don't see why they should do it, you know, you're doomed, really. So as well as coaching them on the ABCs, there are tons of really good stories about successful executive sponsorship. So please, you know, show them what's good as well as showing them what's bad. Do show them what's good. And then finally, I think do a lot of the work, or penultimately, do a lot of the work for them. They can't do it all themselves. And anyway, you know, they've got people employed to do this sort of thing. You can create the communications plans. You can write the emails. You can do the sponsorship plan for them. You can create the opportunities for them to engage with their staff more frequently and in different ways. You just have to sort of wheel them up there and get them to do it, get them on board. One of the things that sponsors do say they have great difficulties with or that the biggest difficulty with the ABC is building the coalition plan, the sponsorship coalition. So please help them with that. You know, if you're really going to focus that area for whatever reason, sponsors have great difficulty with. So that's it. Thank you very much indeed for listening. We would be very, very happy to take questions, and all it remains for me to do is also thank my colleague very much, Janet, for stepping up.
You're welcome.
So have we got any questions?
Hi
Nothing
guys,
in the
just
chat.
while people are getting their questions together, I'll ask a question if that's okay. So I'm really passionate about this, and when I did the training that you've been on, the ProSci training, and you just sit there and think, like, this is a no-brainer, you know, and everything you've gone through today in terms of the effectiveness of change management and the change in the outcomes of your project, you just think, this, like, why aren't people doing this? You must be bashing your heads against your desk every day. But one thing I've come across, like, I've never worked on a project with a good sponsor or good change management. There's some attempts, you know, the old training and communication side, but it's never worked very well. But when I look at projects and you think of the delivery of a project end to end, and then you add change management on top of that, you could be adding, I don't know, 20%, 30%, whatever it is, budget, wrapping change management around this project, which is obviously huge cost on a big project that has to be found from somewhere. How do you kind of convince executives that that is worthwhile? Because that's your step one. People have to be on board with change management and pay for it.
So there's a lot of things that we get asked that a lot, and we experience that an awful lot. Because a lot of the time when we come in and we say what we do, they go, oh, you know, they don't understand the value. So I would I potentially do a lot of mine is convincing the project board, the exec sponsor, and one-to-ones the importance of the people element of change. I tell them my war wound stories. I tell them that when I worked for myself for 3 years, I didn't have a website and a phone, but I was fully employed for 3 years, because it wasn't on day one where they realized they failed. It was 6 months down the line when people weren't fulfilling their processes. It was the resistance. We have the backup with ProSci, which tells us the importance. It also, there's a slide that we didn't show that says at go live is only when you start to see the return on investment. The return on investment is the time that you spent and the financial cost to the organization at go live. But at go live, how many go lives have you been at that people have started to run around like headless chickens? That people don't know what they're doing. I tell stories of where we did test runs of go live, and telephones couldn't be answered even half as quickly as they could the day before, and we were able to calculate how much that would cost. That's something that Claire and I do as customer success managers. We work out what the value is and why you're going through this and what happens if you don't hit it. And then when we can demonstrate that they're not going to hit it, people start to pay attention. And by the way, Claire and I feel sometimes we can't convince them to put the effort into the people element of change. And then it's a bit of a struggle. And we've got one of our colleagues has had, he's working on a project that's had 6 attempts, and they vowed, and then our colleague got involved, and it's now working because they're focusing on the people element of change. They said, you know what, we're just going to listen to you now. And they've had 6 attempts and now it's working. So it's effort.
Absolutely, it really is effort. If I can just add to that, I agree with you completely, Janet. A lot of the projects that I work on, I join it and they're already halfway through, or they're not live yet, but they're not getting where they want to do. People aren't doing the process work they need to do, the process mapping. And I found it useful to do a return on investment calculation with them. If you use the ProSci tools, you'll know what those are, because a lot of the time they don't actually realize that it's people using the software that will give them the return on the investment. You're only going to have a really high return on investment if you're just replacing some new kit, and the fact that the new kit's replacing the old kit is all that matters. But it's the fact that people are using the software is what's going to give you the return on investment. And again, that might be completely obvious to us, but when they see the numbers, when I actually put the numbers in and say, okay, this has cost $1 million, but using the software is only going to give us 200,000 because that's what we've saved on licensing fees and replacing the hardware or not replacing the hardware. The rest of the benefit, the rest of the 2 million we're expecting from that, comes from people actually using it in their day job. And they say, well, they're going to use it because they have to use it. And of course, then you find out X months later, look, they're not even doing the process stuff that they need to do. Why are they going to follow this, use this bit of software that they're not familiar with? Why are they going to do that? You've got to convince them, and those messages have to get out.
There's a message in the chat from Paul saying there's a lot of bad news stories. Too right, Paul, there is. If the challenge is proof of value, are they good, solid examples to help demonstrate to sponsors the positive impact of doing the no-brainer activity? To be honest with you, Paul, we don't have a lot of, you did this, no formal stuff from Microsoft said we did this and this was our results. A lot of it is to do with Claire and my life experience. One of our bosses describes us as no spring chickens in our team. In other words,
I didn't know that. Thanks.
That's how he introduces us, Claire. Because we've got a lot of dynamics experience. We've a lot of stories. We've a lot of war wounds. We have a lot of customers willing to come and speak to other customers saying, we worked with Janet, we worked with Claire, we did what she said and it's worked. And these are the benefits. But formally, not so much. We've got some of the work, Paul, from ProSci that can give us those figures, but nothing really formal other than customer references.
Yeah, if I can come in on that, hi Paul. That's one of the things that actually attracted me to ProSci which is the change management methodology that is used by the CSMs, is that it's research. It started out as a research organization, and they're talking to all these companies around the world about the things that they do on their projects that work and don't work. And then over the years, they've developed this methodology to say, okay, do these things, and you'll be more successful. But they carry on doing the research. And so it's not just somebody's opinion, obviously from Microsoft, getting a CSM from Microsoft, that has some weight, particularly I imagine at the exec level, to what they're saying. But if you just want some evidence, the research is there. It's facts and figures. The charts that were in this presentation and in other ProSci material. It's if you do these things, you will be more successful, because we've proved it with these hundreds of organizations over the last 20 years. So whilst that's not, putting a paper in front of somebody and saying, do this and it will do that, it's not that summarized. There are facts and figures out there to prove that this stuff works. Anyone else got a question? So a question from Wendy. What impact do you find the internal politics dynamics within a company have on your ability to empower and educate an effective sponsor? Good question.
It does. It really, really does. And I think Janet's smiling because I know what she's going to say, so I'll let her say that. But just before she does, when I talked about in one of the last slides about the problems that exec sponsors have with the ABCs, they find that the building of the coalition is tough. That's where you can really step in and help them, because there's a lot of politics at every level in the organization. A lot of people saying, look how good I am, and look how good this is going to be. So sometimes you've got sponsors who really just want to keep everything to themselves. They have to be educated to realize, and sometimes it's not going to be them that's going to make that approach to the other sponsor, because they might have had a fight in the playground, so it's definitely something that impacts it and needs to be managed.
It's really difficult. It's like telling somebody their child's ugly at times, because it's an awkward conversation to say. You have to come in and speak up to somebody and say, you're not doing the role of executive sponsor that we expect you to do, or the project needs you to do. It's a really uncomfortable call. Some of our little sneaky techniques of saying things but not saying things that Claire and I have in our little arsenal of bags is, because we're ProSci practitioners and Andrew, we can use some certain tools. And we use a tool called the PCT, which is a project change triangle, and it's a little assessment, quick fire couple of questions, and each question has a 0 to 3. And in the end, we get a triangle that's a bit skew width. And usually in a room, when we are answering the question saying an active and visible sponsor, and somebody says, well, I haven't seen you. Where have you been? Or you were at this meeting, and they get a score of a 0. And all of a sudden, the triangle looks a bit skew width and very, very weak on the sponsorship. And that doesn't look good. So we're not saying anything. We're getting everybody else to answer it. And then we're just playing it back. And we use that also with project management. We use it for change management. But we have to be a bit sensitive. And one of the key things that Claire said at the end there was, very rarely do we sit an exec sponsor down and say, this is the role we expect you to do. So sometimes it can be just simply telling the ABCs and understanding what the ABCs are. The best executive sponsor I ever worked with, I tell this story a lot, is the scariest man I ever worked with. He was active and visible, and around the boardroom table, he went round every single person in lovely suits, and he asked every single one of them what was the name of their champion in charge of their business area. And they didn't know, and he smashed his hand on the table. All the teacups went up. And see, the next day, not only did they know them, they knew their kid's name, they knew what they were doing last weekend. So having a sponsor who's active and visible, who takes the role in the boardroom and on the people element of change, is a wonderful thing to see. And that is the hardest thing. And a lot of you guys will be partners. And that's really difficult. You're not in such a strong position. That sounds a bit cheeky, but you know what I mean, that we're from Microsoft, we're free and we're trying to help. a lot of the time your time restraints, and it's difficult. So I understand it's a difficult conversation, but I spoke to a partner in Scotland recently, and they have set up a rule that the project doesn't start until they have a one-to-one with the exec sponsorship to understand what their expectation from the partner is on that sponsor. And I thought that was amazing. And they said projects are being delayed because we refuse to move until we have that session. So it's about setting you know what's best. So putting those rules in place for you as an organisation.
Thank you both. That was an interesting question and answer. We are out of time pretty much. I'm happy to keep the call open if Claire and Janet have the time to answer any more questions. So we've got one more question there. But what I just wanted to do is post people to the next sessions that are on. So I've just put that in the chat. And also really thank Claire and Janet for coming on today and sharing their time and their knowledge on what is, I think, a really, really important topic. We'd love to do more sessions on change management and all the things that the CSMs do. So look forward to those in future user groups, maybe even some kind of a half-day event on change management we've talked about before. So, but we're going to share the slides. I hope that's okay with you guys, Claire and Janet, and also share the video on YouTube. So look out for those. That'll be posted on the user group website as well. So, but really just wanted to say thanks very much. I'm happy to stay on the call because I don't have another session yet, but thanks very much, both of you, for this great session. Thank you.
Yeah, we can stay on for a few minutes if you want to hang about. That's tickety-boo.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen something from, is it Chimmy? Is that how we say your name?
Yeah, it's just Chimmy.
Hi, Chimmy. Yeah. Janet's going to have definitely something to say on this, but just one thing that springs to mind quickly for me, because I work with some people who have been and are difficult executive sponsors. I think we all do. So let's not just pretend it's all sunshine and roses here. It isn't. And this is about things you can do to help ameliorate the problem, tips and tricks. One of the things that I did recently with a difficult executive sponsor, and Janet was saying, God, you can't tell them that they're rubbish and that they shouldn't be the sponsor. They are, is to still be direct and honest, but to couch it within something else. One of the things I talked to them about was, what I was doing on the project and what my role was and how far I'd got. And I slipped in the ABCs. I slipped in talking to them about that. I didn't, give them a grade or anything like that. I just talked to them about what the ABCs were, and they took a few ideas from that. They're not brilliant yet, but they are moving in the right direction. So you can couch it more softly by talking about something else and bringing it in. Janet, I'm sure you've got something to add.
Oh, I always do, and that's half my problem, as we all know. I never shut up. Sorry
at all.
It's a conversation that is sometimes very hard. One of the things that also we experience is that we don't get access to the exec sponsor ever, and that's really, really difficult. So one of the things that we do when that happens, is that we can't get there. Do you think about the org chart, or not the org chart, the impacted chart, and go and find somebody else and say the message there, and say somebody that influences them, and start to work out, how do I get to that person? If it's not just messages from you, Chimmy, or Claire, or me, but messages from other people that will start to have the impact. So I'm on a company at the minute, and we use a phrase called ADCAR. It's a process phrase: awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement. And I've started just saying it everywhere. And now I'm starting to hear it in meetings. Oh, well, that's the K of ADCAR. That's the R. Or that's the... So it's about finding ways and means to get to that person. It's a bit of manipulation, unfortunately. But we all have to do it to get it across, because Claire started her whole demonstration on this. An active and visible sponsor is the cheapest thing. That's a good line. It's the cheapest thing. It costs you nothing. And it has the most impact. It is the cheapest thing. Just keep saying it. If you want to have the biggest impact, it doesn't cost you any money. Do you want to know about it? Just keep saying the benefits that comes from an active and visible sponsor. And then and say, you know what, can I support you? Sometimes they don't have time, and they're brilliant sponsors, but they don't have the time. So write those darn messages for them. Do the work for them. And so that scary sponsor that I loved in the end, I used to write messages for him, get him to add his slant, and then he sent them. So you can manipulate as much as you can, and the best you can do. I think there's more questions, is there?
I think it was just lots of people saying thanks very much. Lots of people interested in finding out more, which is great. But I think that's all the questions for now. But yeah, I just want to say huge thanks for coming on, sharing your time and your knowledge. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much indeed. Bye.
Bye.